She was still bleeding from childbirth when they dragged her barefoot into the square, chained her to a post, and put her up for sale. The baby in her arms whimpered against her chest, too new to the world to understand the laughter of men who shouted bids as if mother and child were nothing more than livestock. Texas territory, late summer of 1879. The air pressed down heavy, over 102 degrees in the shade, thick with tobacco smoke and the sour tang of whiskey. Dust rose under the boots of ranch hands and drifters until it curled like smoke around the makeshift stage. A handful of warped planks nailed together became, on this day, an altar to humiliation. At its center knelt Isa. She was young, though life had carved more years into her than her face revealed. Her hair clung damp to her temples, her bare feet dug into the splinters of the platform. Around her right ankle, a chain bit deep, skin rubbed raw and red. The dress she wore had once been pale, but now clung in tatters, dark patches of blood streaking from her knees down. She held the infant close, pressing her lips to the child's scalp in a silent act of defiance. No begging, no tears, just a woman refusing to break where the world most wanted her shattered. The auctioneer puffed out his chest, black vest straining over his gut, grin wide as a jackal. "Step right up, gentlemen," he called. 2 for 1. A body strong enough to mend and a squealer to raise your name. Laughter cracked the air. "Fresh as a spring calf," one man hollered. Another spat tobacco into the dust and muttered, "Still bleeding and they want to sell her whole." The bids started low, $50, $75, and climbed fast. Voices overlapped, the price rising like the shimmering heat above the dirt. 100, 150, 200. Isa's chest tightened with each number, her breath thinning as though the crowd was pressing her down beneath its weight. Then, just as the noise swelled, a single voice cut through. Low, calm, hard as gravel. 300. Silence crashed over the square. Heads turned. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, tall and unsmiling. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face. His duster coat was worn from miles of trail, boots scuffed near through. Nothing remarkable, until you saw his eyes. Cold and steady, they held a kind of resolve that made the bravest heckler shut his mouth. The auctioneer faltered. "Sir, I reckon you heard wrong. I heard just fine." A murmur ran through the men gathered. "What's your intent with the merchandise?" someone demanded. The stranger stepped forward, his boots striking the planks like hammers. He rested a hand on the revolver at his hip, not drawing, only making sure they knew it was there. His answer was plain: to give her a bed, to let her sleep. The crowd stared, unable to comprehend why any man would pay $300 not to claim ownership, but to offer mercy. Why would a stranger risk so much just to let a broken woman rest? If you love tales of grit, redemption, and love that lasts, subscribe Dust and Destiny now and ride with us to the very end. The gavel struck the wood, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "Sold!" the auctioneer barked, though his voice wavered with something close to disbelief. For a moment, no one moved. The girl was still shackled to the post, her baby clutched to her chest, the crowd holding its breath as if the scene might yet reverse itself. Then the stranger stepped forward. Boots scuffed the boards, measured, steady. He pulled a knife from his belt, its blade flashing once in the glare of the sun. Isa flinched when the iron chain split with a hard shink and fell to the floor with a final echoing clank. Her ankle throbbed as blood welled against the torn skin, but the sound of that chain hitting the planks was louder than any pain, an ending, or maybe the beginning of one. He extended his hand, palm steady, waiting. She did not take it. Her eyes flicked to his revolver, then back to his face. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice hoarse from too many hours of silence. His answer came as if it had been carved in stone. "Sleep. Then we'll talk like people." She stared at him, searching for the snare, the angle, the inevitable demand. But his gaze never shifted. At last she pushed herself up on shaking legs, the baby whimpering weakly in her arms. She swayed, steadied herself, and stood. When he led her down from the stage, the crowd parted like brush before a fire. No one dared follow. Men muttered into their beards, women glanced away, and even the auctioneer stepped back as if he'd lost control of something he'd never owned. The stranger's name she learned only as they reached the edge of town. Jack Morale, he said simply, as if it mattered less than the dust on his coat. Isa kept her distance, walking barefoot on blistered ground, her body screaming for rest. But pride carried her forward. Jack did not reach for her, did not try to steady her, only kept pace. His long strides matched to her shorter, stumbling steps. Every few yards he glanced toward the baby, not her, as if the child's survival was the only measure of this strange bargain. By twilight they reached his horse, tied at the hitching rail beyond the last saloon. He swung up with practiced ease, then looked down at her. "You can ride or walk," he said. She tightened her grip on the child. "If you touch me, I'll slit your throat." Jack nodded once, no hint of humor, no mockery in his eyes. "That's fair." He shifted in the saddle, waiting. The words disarmed her more than any show of force. Men she had known had laughed at such threats or punished them. He accepted hers like a contract between equals. Slowly, Isa lifted the baby higher against her chest and climbed onto the horse behind him. The trail stretched long and empty, dust curling into the dark. She kept her body stiff, her knife hand hidden beneath the folds of her skirt, ready if he turned. But Jack said nothing, his silence filled only by the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves. Hours passed. Stars scattered themselves across the black sky, coyotes crying from the ridges. Isa's eyelids drooped heavy, though her grip never loosened on the child. When her body sagged against his back, she forced herself upright again, refusing to yield even to exhaustion. Jack spoke only once more that night. "You'll have a roof before morning, food, clean sheets." She almost laughed, bitter, disbelieving, but something in his tone stopped her. He sounded less like a man making promises and more like one stating facts, as if mercy itself were an order he meant to keep. Isa said nothing. Yet when the trail dipped toward a hollow where lantern light flickered in the distance, she did not climb down, did not run. She stayed on the horse, barefoot but unbroken, riding into the unknown beside a man who asked for nothing. And for the first time since the baby's first cry, the road ahead seemed wider than the cage behind. The cabin stood apart from the main house, small and weathered, its porch sagging slightly under the weight of years. To Isa, it felt at first like another cell, only this one made of wood instead of iron. Yet when Jack pushed open the door, the first thing she noticed was the cot. Clean sheets, folded blanket, and a stove with embers still glowing. A cradle waited in the corner, patched together with mismatched nails, but sturdy. He had fixed it that morning, she later learned, as if he had been expecting someone who needed more than survival. The first days were silent. Jack rose before dawn to tend his horses and cattle. Isa remained inside, feeding the child, keeping her eyes on the door as if it might betray her at any moment. But every morning, without fail, bread and milk appeared on the step. Some days a jar of applesauce, other days a book with pressed flowers tucked inside. He never lingered, never asked questions. Trust does not arrive with trumpets. It seeps in slowly, like water through dry soil. Isa resisted it, clutching the child to her chest as if the world would snatch him away the moment she softened. Yet when she laid him in the cradle one morning, she found something resting on the edge. A square of cloth, soft with age, embroidered at the corners with tiny bluebirds. She held it between her fingers, running the worn threads as if they might whisper a story. When Jack returned at dusk with a sack of oats, she asked, her voice cautious, "Why give this to me?" He paused, eyes settling on the cloth. "My mother stitched it when I was a boy, for my sister. She died one winter, too cold, too quick." Isa lowered her gaze. "Then why not keep it?" "Because your child deserves more than chains and dirt floors." He left it at that, turning back to the barn. She did not thank him, but she folded the cloth and set it beside the cradle like a talisman. Night brought no rest. Isa woke drenched in sweat, breath ragged, the taste of iron and straw still sharp in her mouth. In her dreams, she heard the auctioneer's gavel striking wood, the jeers of men above her cries, the sickening feel of blood-soaked earth clinging to her knees. She jolted awake, clutching the baby so tightly he whimpered. The cabin seemed too small, the shadows too deep. But then she noticed the glow through the window. A lantern burned steady on the porch. Jack sat in an old chair, hat in his lap, coat draped over his shoulders, as if he intended to keep watch through the night. He did not knock, did not speak, simply kept the flame alive. For 3 nights, Isa slept with her knife tucked under her pillow, hand gripping its hilt. But by the 4th, her fingers uncurled. The knife slipped to the floor. The baby breathed soft and steady beside her. And when she woke to the faint creak of the chair outside, she found her chest easing, if only by a fraction. The days turned slower. Isa hung the child's laundry on a line, fetched water from the well, learned the rhythm of quiet moments. Jack passed without comment, offering her the dignity of silence. She began to hum under her breath while working, snatches of half-forgotten lullabies she had not dared sing in months. One morning, drawing water at the well, Jack tipped his hat. "Morning, Miss Isa." She froze, rope burning against her palms. "What did you say?" "Your name. I reckon you have one." She blinked, lips parting as though the word itself was foreign. "No one has ever said it like that." "Then they've been wrong," he replied, and walked back to his chores. That night, as the lantern burned low, Isa sat with the child cradled against her and whispered into the stillness, "Isa Loreen." The name lingered in the air like a prayer finally spoken. She thought no one heard. But Jack, passing by with his rifle slung at his shoulder, paused just long enough to answer softly, "Pleasure to meet you proper, Miss Loreen." The words hung between them, simple yet weighted, as if he had known some piece of that pain himself. And in the quiet that followed, Isa wondered if their paths had crossed in sorrow long before they ever met in Calico Ridge. The air was cooler that evening, a breeze moving through the cedar posts and carrying the faint scent of rain. Isa sat on the porch steps, the baby dozing in her arms, when she noticed Jack lingering by the fence line longer than usual. He leaned against the rail, the brim of his hat pulled low, watching the horizon as if the past might ride back out of it. He didn't speak until the sun was nearly gone. "My sister's name was Laura." Isa glanced up, startled by the sound of his voice. Jack rarely offered words without reason. "She was 12 when a man came to our place," he continued. "Promised my father he'd take her east for schooling. Said she'd have a better life than we could give." His jaw worked hard, the muscles tight against his stubbled cheek. "I was 18. I should have gone after them. But I waited. By the time I reached the town where he'd taken her, she was already gone. Auction block, no trail. Nothing left but a necklace she used to wear, tossed in a drawer like trash." He fell silent, his gaze fixed on the darkening field. Isa's chest tightened. She recognized the weight in his words, the endless replay of a choice too late, the silence that follows when there's no way to undo it. "That's why you bought me," she said quietly. Jack shook his head. "No, I bought you because no one else in that square saw a person, only a price. I couldn't let that stand again." His voice cracked faintly, then steadied. "But yes, my silence since then has been penance. Talking won't bring her back, but maybe doing something different could keep me from failing twice." Isa looked down at the child nestled against her chest. For a long while she said nothing. Then the words came, halting but sharp, pulled from the well of memory she had buried deep. "I went into labor on the straw floor of a holding pen," she whispered. "The guards laughed when I screamed. One man kicked near my belly and called me a waste of feed. I begged for water. They poured it out on the ground in front of me." Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "When the baby came, I thought he was dead. He didn't cry at first, just lay there, covered in blood while they argued over who would clean up the mess." Her arms tightened around her son until he stirred with a soft whimper. "They chained me before I could stand, before I even finished bleeding. Then they dragged me onto that stage, men bidding like I was a mule, and I just held on, because if I broke, they would have won more than my body." Jack didn't move. He didn't reach for her, didn't say the easy words men often said when they wanted to soothe without listening. He just stood at the fence, head bowed, letting her voice fill the space between them. Finally, he spoke. "I can't take that from you. I can only stand beside it." The baby shifted, sighing into sleep. Issa let her eyes close for a moment, weary but unburdened in a way she hadn't felt since before the chains. No judgment, no dismissal, just a man carrying his own ghosts, willing to sit with hers. She opened her eyes again, meeting his across the fading light. "Then maybe we both stop standing alone." Something eased in Jack's shoulders at those words. He nodded once, a simple motion, but it carried the weight of a vow. That night, Issa laid the baby in the cradle and lay down on the cot. For the first time since her capture, her hand did not grope for the knife beneath her pillow. Through the window, she could see the faint glow of Jack's lantern still burning outside, steady as a heartbeat. Her breathing slowed, her body uncoiling from months of vigilance. When sleep finally came, it carried no screams, no chains, no blood, only quiet, only rest. It was fragile, fleeting, and easily broken, but it was a beginning. The first breath of trust between two people bound not by pity or possession, but by the scars they had chosen to share. The morning sun was soft that day, slipping over the ridges like a promise. Issa stood outside the cabin, her son balanced on her hip, when Jack walked toward her from the barn. His steps were slower than usual, deliberate, as though the weight of what he carried in his hand demanded care. When he reached her, he stopped short, his palm opening to reveal a small silver locket. The metal had dulled with years, its hinges worn smooth, but it still caught the light with a faint glimmer. Issa looked at it, then at him, uncertain. "It belonged to Laura," he said quietly. "My sister. She never got to wear it. I've carried it long enough." Issa hesitated. "Why give it to me?" Jack drew a breath, steadying himself. "Because it's not for hiding behind. It's for remembering what's worth fighting for. And you?" He paused, eyes meeting hers without wavering. "You're worth more than what was done to you. So is that child." Her throat tightened, a lump rising she couldn't swallow down. She wanted to refuse it, to push the gift back into his hands, but something inside her shifted. Carefully, she closed her fingers around the locket, feeling its cool weight press into her palm. That night, after she laid the baby in his cradle, Issa sat on the cot with the locket resting in her lap. She turned it over and over, tracing the tiny etching on its surface, a faded swirl of vines. Her first instinct was to tuck it beneath the mattress, out of sight, like every secret she had been forced to carry. But the thought of hiding it brought a bitter taste to her mouth. The next morning, she clasped it around her neck. The silver rested against her collarbone, visible above the frayed edge of her dress. When Jack returned from the field, he stopped short, eyes flicking to the locket and back to her face. He didn't speak, only tipped his hat in a silent acknowledgement that made her heart lurch in ways she didn't understand. Later, while drawing water, Issa caught her reflection in the well's surface. For a long moment she stared, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. Not the chained girl from the stage, not the trembling body bent under mockery, but someone else. Someone carrying both scars and defiance. When Jack passed by, she spoke aloud, more to herself than to him. "I cannot erase the chains, but I can choose what they mean now." His stride slowed, his head turning slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He simply let her words settle into the air, solid and real, as if they had been waiting to be said. From that day on, the shift was visible. Issa no longer walked with her eyes fixed on the ground. She looked up, steady when she entered the trading post, ignoring the whispers that followed. The locket glimmered at her throat, a quiet declaration that she would not be defined by the iron scars around her ankle. She began to move with more purpose. Her laughter, rare but real, slipped out when the baby gurgled in delight, or when Jack's horse snorted in protest at an ill-fitted saddle. She even hummed while mending clothes, her voice carrying through the open door of the cabin. Jack noticed, though he never said so. What mattered wasn't his recognition, but her own. The locket became less a relic of his sister and more a symbol of Issa's choice. The day she stopped being chattel and started being Issa Loreen again. Healing, she realized, wasn't just survival. Survival kept you breathing. Healing let you claim your own name, your own reflection, your own worth. And every time the silver glinted in the light, she remembered not just the pain that brought her here, but the strength that would carry her forward. The days of fragile peace could not last forever. Issa felt it in the stillness before dawn, in the way the horses startled at shadows, in the restless twist of her dreams. Trouble has a way of finding those who have broken free. It came on horseback one evening as the sun bled low across the fields. 4 riders approached the ranch gates, dust rising behind them like a storm. Their coats were long, faces half hidden beneath brims, but Issa knew the voices before she saw their eyes. Men from the square, men who had laughed when she bled. Jack stepped from the barn, shotgun already balanced in his hands. He moved calm, deliberate, the way a man does when fear has no place left to live. The leader dismounted, spurs jangling. "We're here for what's ours," he drawled, a paper clenched between his fingers. "Girl's a missing asset. Registry says she never cleared her sale. That makes her stolen property." Issa, clutching her son inside the cabin, heard every word. Blood rushed in her ears. For a heartbeat, she thought of ducking behind the curtain, of hiding where shadows might shield her. But then she remembered the locket at her throat, the promise she had spoken to her own reflection. She was no one's property. She stepped out onto the porch, child in her arms. Jack's head turned sharply. "Get back inside," he said low, firm. "No," Issa answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "If I hide, I let them write the story again. Not this time." The men sneered, laughter crackling like dry tinder. One pointed at her, spitting tobacco into the dust. "See? She knows what she is." Jack's eyes hardened. He took one step forward, the barrels of his shotgun leveled but not yet raised. "At this ranch," he said, each word hammered flat as iron, "property doesn't breathe. That girl has lungs and a name." The leader's grin faltered. "You making this legal?" "I'm making it human." The standoff stretched, brittle as glass. Then, with a sharp jerk of his chin, the leader spat into the dirt. "Not worth it tonight." He swung back onto his horse. "But you owe me, rancher. Debt don't vanish with words." They rode off, leaving only hoofprints and the bitter taste of unfinished war. Issa's knees shook, but she did not step back inside. She stood tall on the porch, child pressed against her chest, the locket glinting at her throat. Jack lowered the shotgun, his gaze flicking to her with a mixture of fury and respect. "You could have been killed," he said. "So could you," she replied, her chin lifting. The fight was not finished. Within a week, word spread through Calico Ridge. A challenge had been issued. High noon, Main Street, the trafficker demanding payment or blood. Jack did not flinch. "I'll stand," he told her, tightening the cinch on his horse. "I won't hide," Issa answered, holding her son close. Her courage was aflame, and in its light Jack's own resolve burned brighter. The town had not seen a duel in 3 years. But that day, shutters closed, children were pulled inside, and the street filled with men waiting for violence. The sun stood merciless overhead, heat shimmering off the dirt. Jack walked into it alone, sleeves rolled, revolver at his side. Across from him, the trafficker adjusted his fine gray coat, pearl-handled pistol glinting at his hip. He licked his lips, eyes darting, confident in cruelty, but not in conscience. The sheriff stood between them, hat in hand. "On my count." Issa watched from the edge of the alley, her heart pounding like a drum, the child pressed against her shoulder. She wanted to scream, to run, but she forced herself still. This was not just Jack's fight. It was hers. 1. Dust hung in the air. 2. Hands twitched, the world narrowing to the space between 2 men. 3. The shots cracked almost as one. A bullet grazed Jack's sleeve. His own found its mark, clean through the trafficker's shoulder. The man spun with a cry, pistol tumbling from his grasp, body crashing into the dirt. Blood soaked his coat, his teeth gritted in pain. Jack reloaded slowly, walking forward as silence swallowed the street. He stood over the fallen man, eyes cold, voice steady. "Men don't buy lives, and I don't shoot to prove I can." Then he turned his back and walked away. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. No one followed. The sheriff bent to tend the wounded trafficker, muttering about justice that would have to come in its own time. Issa stepped from the alley, knees weak but unbending. Jack's shirt was torn, his arm bleeding lightly, but his stride was strong. She pressed the baby close, her eyes never leaving him. The fight was not over. The registry still claimed her as property, and the men who thrived on that trade would not yield so easily. But for now, the trafficker had been broken without blood on Jack's soul, and the town had witnessed something they could not forget. It was a temporary victory, but it mattered, because for the first time Issa had not hidden. She had stood in the open, a woman with lungs and a name, and the world had been forced to see her. The duel had silenced the square, but the law still held its grip. The trafficker's wound healed fast enough for him to press his claim, waving papers and registry seals in the faces of officials too used to looking away. Jack knew steel alone would not end it, so he called for witnesses, men and women who had stood in the dust that day, who had heard the auctioneer's words and seen the blood on Issa's legs when they chained her to the post. At first, the townsfolk hesitated. Speaking against the trade meant risking their own peace, their own standing. But one by one, they came. The blacksmith who had sharpened the shackles but never slept well after. The barkeep who had heard the trafficker boasting of profit. Even the boy who had carried water to the square and remembered Issa's silent defiance as she pressed her lips to her baby's head. Their testimonies painted the truth in strokes too bold to ignore. The judge from the circuit court rode in dusty and tired, but when he unrolled the records, something cracked. The auction ledger was smeared, numbers scrawled without proper seals. The contracts had been falsified, signatures forged, names erased. It was not just cruel, it was unlawful. Jack stood with Issa at his side as the judge declared the papers void. "By law of the territory," he said, voice carrying through the hush of the hall. "This woman is no one's property. She is Issa Loreen, free." The word struck harder than any bullet. Issa's breath caught, her knees almost buckling under the weight of them. Free. Not in secret, not in the shadow of a cabin, but in the open, where the whole town bore witness. The trafficker cursed, shouting about debts unpaid, but his voice rang hollow against the judge's gavel. The sheriff seized what remained of the records, carried them to the street, and set them ablaze. The flames licked high, devouring the names and numbers, leaving only smoke curling into the blue Texas sky. Issa stepped forward. Her son shifted in her arms, tiny fingers curling into her dress. She looked at the faces around her, the same faces that had once laughed as she knelt bleeding, the same lips that had called her chattel. Her throat was dry, but she forced the words out, steady as she could. "My name," she said, "is Issa Loreen." Silence fell, thick and absolute. For a moment, no one moved. Then the blacksmith removed his hat. The barkeep lowered his head. One by one, the townsfolk bowed in quiet respect, not with cheers, not with clapping, but with the solemn stillness given only to moments that mattered. Jack looked at her, eyes steady, pride unspoken but fierce. Issa did not smile, not yet, but something in her posture changed. Shoulders back, chin lifted, she stood not as property, not as survivor alone, but as a woman who had claimed her name in full daylight. The triumph was not loud, it was reverent, fragile and whole. For the first time, Issa Loreen belonged only to herself. By the following spring, the Morel homestead had changed. It was not larger, not grander, but it carried a fullness it had never known before. The vegetable rows stretched a little wider. The barn door had been painted clean, and along the porch, quilts hung to dry in the sunlight, stitched by hands that had once trembled but now found steadiness again. Children's laughter drifted across the yard. Issa's boy chasing after two others who had arrived with nothing but fear in their eyes and now shouted with the careless joy of the young. A sign hung above the doorway of the second cabin, carved into a rough plank by Jack himself. It read simply, "Rest here." Women came quietly, sometimes with bruises, sometimes with little more than a bundle of clothes, and stayed until they could breathe again. Issa met each one at the fence. No judgment, no demand. "Stay until you know where you belong," she would tell them, echoing the words she had once needed to hear. One evening, when the children had finally tired and the lamps glowed soft in the windows, Jack found her sitting at the table, journal open beneath her hand. He placed a calloused palm on the wood and cleared his throat. "I don't have much," he said. "Not land worth bragging on, not riches, but I have a name. If you ever want it, Issa, it's yours." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting both the lantern light and the weight of memory. Then she closed the journal, set down her pen, and answered quietly, "I was sold once. This time, I choose." Jack's breath caught, his jaw tightening with the restraint of a man who rarely showed emotion. But the faint curve of a smile reached his eyes. Issa reached across the table, laying her hand over his. Later, alone, she opened her journal again and wrote, "I was once bought for less than a horse, but I was loved like a human. And that is the only price that ever mattered." That night, the prairie sky stretched endless above them. Stars scattered like lanterns spilled across velvet, while real lanterns flickered in the yard, casting golden circles where the children ran barefoot in the grass. Jack stood beside Issa on the porch, their shoulders brushing, their silence full. The past had not vanished. The scar around her ankle, the memories of chains and jeering voices would never disappear. But Issa knew now the truth that mattered most. The past did not decide who she was. The choice of how to carry it, that belonged to her. And she had chosen love, chosen freedom, chosen a home built on mercy instead of chains. If stories like this stir your soul, subscribe now, share it with a friend, and tell us your thoughts in the comments.